Welcome to the Agile Coaching Exchange 2024, new year, new agenda, fresh ideas, new things to learn. So we're welcome to have you here. I think we're in our 11th or 12th year now, so we've been going a pretty long time. But it's great to see, as always, lots of familiar faces. And one of those faces tonight is going to be Surj. And I've never had the opportunity to work with Surj, but over the years, he pretty much comes to most of the Agile coaching exchanges and Kanban coaching exchanges. And I've been in a few quizzes with Surj, and my knowledge is pretty good. And he was giving me a run for my money when it comes to some of this knowledge stuff, though I do believe I beat him in the end. But hey, we're all winners here, Surj. So because I get to see him so often, and I love the things that he talks about, and I love to create, and so does Ben, new opportunities for people who've never even spoke before to come and talk to you fabulous people at the Agile Coaching Exchange. So at the end of last year, I invited Surj to come along and join us, and he's actually doing his first ever meetup talk tonight with us. So be gentle with him, people, but it could be the start of a prosperous future career in public speaking for your Surj. Surj is a Scrum Master, he's an Agile coach, contracting out there on the market, but also he's just a great person with lots of great knowledge. So make sure you connect with him afterwards on LinkedIn. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Surj tonight. Take it away, my dear.
Thanks, Ellen. I'm Surj. My background, as Helen mentioned, is it's been in Agile space for the past 10 years odd. Prior to that, I was in IT. I like to know the origins of stuff, why we do things, which is one of the reasons I have an interest in the kind of things that we're talking about today. And I'm also a big Pixar fan. So the talk today is about why is change hard. And before I start, it'd be interesting to get your feedback on your experience, on some of the challenges that you've had, on why you've seen why change is hard for you, or you've seen an environment where change is hard. Right. It'd be great if you could share some of your insights in the chat or shout them out.
Fear of failure was one of the ones that I brought up.
Right. Yep.
Difficulty in changing culture and getting the necessary support to do that.
Change on change for me. Sometimes we're going through so much change, it just gets a bit too much.
Yeah, need for safety, fear of the unknown.
Sometimes change is too big that you can't contain it. So you're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
We spoke about needing a reason to change, and maybe you've got very successful doing what you've been doing for the last 20 years. So why would you want to change that?
Yeah. Right.
Kind of inertia, isn't it?
Right. Actually, there's a lot of good points here, and I think I may be able to, the talk would hopefully address or help some of these points as well. So, cool. It'd be good to see what your feedback on this is. Right. So, thanks for the feedback, folks. So the first part of what I'll be talking about is based on a book by Daniel Kahneman. It's on thinking fast and slow. And this is one of the quotes from findings from his research. Thinking is to humans as swimming is to cats. They can do it, but they prefer not to. So in the next few slides, I'll be sharing my interpretations from the book, and along with some other stuff that I find useful along the way. Cool, great. Some people have really read the book as well. Okay, so let's go back about 2.5 million years ago. back in the caveman days, we were very risk averse of what we didn't know. Survival literally could have been the difference between taking the time to think about something new and about the situation and living for another day. Our reaction time to danger made all the difference. So one of the inherited legacies we still have from the era are the way that we react to our environment. The memories of our experiences are held in the fast thinking part of our brain. That's system 1. These memories are the stories that we tell ourselves and are the mental models that we create of our version of the world. So we create our own narratives of what we remember, which may actually be different to what happened. These are what form our biases. Our norms and habits sit here, and these are reflex reactions to the world. So this could be, as an example, when you're driving to one of your regular places. When you're driving, you end up at your destination without realizing how you got there. Or when you're catching the tube, you're standing at a specific place because you know that the door opens here. This is happening automatically. In this system, this is where the brain defaults to taking shortcuts to pattern match, to find information to make a quick decision. Pattern matching takes less effort, and it saves a lot of energy. So in system 1, we're looking at what we already know. These are our biases, and these lead to our default conclusions, whether they're right or wrong. So the brain is being lazy to be efficient. System 1, yeah. So this is what you see is all you get. That's another quote from Daniel Kahneman. You already believe you know the answer, and this is looking in our comfort zone. So question to the audience. A bat and a ball cost £1.10 in total. The bat costs £1 more than a ball. How much does the ball cost? If you can put your answers in the chat, please. I'm seeing 10p's, 2.5p. Yay. So the answer is actually 5p. So our brain has looked at the question, and it's even changed the question that we're seeing, because it can work it out easier by answering something else. So the question actually says, how much more is the bat than the ball? So if the bat is £1 more than the ball, it means it's the cost of the bat and the ball. So the ball is actually 5p. The bat is £1.05 because it's £1 more than the ball. So what happened here? So our brain has looked at this. The question's actually harder than what it saw at first glance. So it's gone for a default response and answer, which is why more commonly we do get use of the answer as 10p. So this is our brain working in being lazy and going into automatic mode. So just for definitions on what we mean by bias, again, this is something that came back from Daniel Kahneman and Amos back in 1972. So what they're basically saying is there's a lot of information out there that we consume on a daily basis. There's so much out there, we can't really cope with it. So what we do is we have to simplify this, and the way it's done is by filtering them through our own personal experiences and preferences, so that we can simplify what we are consuming in order to come up with a conclusion and an answer. And we need to do this quickly, so this is all done in system 1. And if you do a search on biases, there's loads of them out there. I've just picked. I've also just shared a link to a site where they come up. They defined 50 of these, and these are just 3 examples of what we mean by cognitive biases. So, anchoring bias is where we rely heavily on the first piece of information that we see or hear, and this means if we're in a group, if we're looking to size something or estimate something, the first person that speaks, we have an anchoring effect. We gravitate towards what that person said, as opposed to we may have a lot more variability if we said something first. Framing, depending on how information is presented to us, we may come to different conclusions. An experiment that Daniel did was some subjects were asked if they opted for surgery if the survival rate was 90%. Others were asked that they're told the mortality rate was 10%. And the framing of the first question, how that was shared with the people, actually it had more acceptance, even though actually the situation was no different. It's our interpretation of it. These are just 3 examples, and we have loads of these in our heads on it that we use on a day-to-day basis. So that's system 1. What is system 2? System 2 is where we're thinking on purpose. It's a conscious act. This is where we do our problem solving. This is where we imagine new stuff. This is where the magic happens. This is where the learning and the creativity happens. But the problem is, it takes a lot of effort. We're using short-term memory. We've got limited capacity. And this is why we're unable to do other things at the same time. So this is outside of our comfort zone. So what determines if we go into which system? There's this little organ that we have in our heads about the size of an almond called the amygdala. And all the senses that we have actually go to the amygdala first. And this is the organ that helps us think whether or not we are in danger. So all the senses come to this. Our blood pressure goes up, stress hormones are released into the bloodstream, we have energy going up, and we're ready for action, self-preservation. And this is where we make the decision to flight or flight. This is going into system 1. So this is what happened in real circumstances back in the caveman days, where we literally could have died depending on what the danger was. So we needed to survive. This is also something that we still inherited, and this is how our brains work today. So even when we have what is our perceived danger in these times, we have the same kind of response when the amygdala is agitated. In this state of mind, because we're thinking of self-preservation, our focus is narrowed. We're looking for an exit. So this is why we find it hard to think creatively, and we can't think outside of the box in system 1. So this was what was running around in my head when Helen said, "Would you like to do a talk?" And my brain was going like this. So how do we get out of this state? How do we go into system 2? This is where we introduce a pause. This helps calm the amygdala down, helps us actually assess what's actually happening. We're feeling uncomfortable because by definition, we're outside of our comfort zone. Our emotions are signals, and we shouldn't ignore them. So just create that space to understand what it is that they're trying to convey. If you get to know them, understand, recognize them, we get a bit more familiar with the experience of unsettled emotions, and just acknowledge what's happening in our mind and body. That will help us react rather than reacting to our discomfort in a habitual way. With our amygdala calmed down, we're actually choosing how we want to respond. We also have to understand that the brain is a computer. It likes to keep busy. A lot of the thoughts that come to us aren't always useful or true. So having a pause can train our minds to discard unhelpful thoughts by actually actively challenge them to confirm if what we're thinking is valid or useful at all. And we can learn a new behavior to help make better choices rather than going with the default ones, which aren't always the correct ones to make in system one. But that's a shortcut. And in order to get the pause to make better choices, the pause will help us actually think about what it is that we're looking to do and go into system two. This is a difference between reacting to something and thoughtfully responding. Right, so how do we update system one? So the amygdala sits in the fear zone. This is where we go when we have new information that we weren't expecting. Our brain says with this sends up alarm bells that this is something that is new. What do we do? So this is where we manage our amygdala. If we calm it down, we're able to make more informed decisions. And the decision that we make is actually the difference between realizing what your potential is, which we wouldn't be using in a comfort zone, and actually going into the learning or growth zone where we can actually achieve a lot more. By default, we use system one to make reflex reactions because our brain's trying to be efficient. But with practice, we can create learned behavior to break out of this default pattern matching all the time and go into system two. This is a quote from Henry Ford. So when we get information coming in and our brain reacts and we're deciding which way to go, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. Either way, it's a choice that we make. So how do we change system one? Every time we do something in system two, we create new connections in our brain. But what moves our learning from system two to system one is the reinforcement of the connections. So there's another quote here from Donald Hebb: neurons that fire together wire together. New pathways in the brain are formed and reinforced through repetition. And this is how the repetition will move our learnings, reinforce our pathways, and go towards system one and will also actually increase our comfort zone just that much more. An analogy to this is if we're walking through long grass, when we go through it the first time, we can see a little pathway that was left behind. The more we walk through it, the path becomes more defined. But on the other side of things, when we stop using it, path slowly can fade away and the grass will start growing again. So this is where the repetition is reinforcing our new pathways and learnings. And if we do it enough times, it becomes an automatic part of our system one. Another example of this is when we're learning to drive, where we're learning something new, we're learning how to use the gears, just learning to see, engage, and measure distances. This is a learning that happens consciously in learning zone and our growth zone in system two. But because we've practiced it enough, we actually end up doing it in our comfort zone subconsciously. We're not even thinking about this anymore. So in summary, system one is our fast reactions. A lot of the decisions that we make here are automatic, done in our subconscious. We use this on our day-to-day, but they're not always the correct decisions to make because we are pattern matching and going through what we are finding is our default response to something. System two is slower. It's a conscious decision and choice that we make, but it takes a lot more effort. And this is where we make the more complicated decisions and working things out. But it is more reliable because we're actually logically challenging something to come to a conclusion. So system 2 is validating our decisions and feeling safe enough to engage, learn, and grow. That happens in system 2. Repetition helps transfer new learning from system 2, and that's what updates our system 1s and default reactions. I'll take questions at the end if that's okay. Right, this is Oscar Trimboli, and here's some interesting findings that he shared on listening neuroscience. So when we're speaking, we talk between 125, 100 words a minute. But we can actually listen at a much higher rate. We're listening to about 400 words a minute. So what does that mean? There's a gap between how much we talk and how much people are listening. Our brains become bored, which is why we have distractions, and this is why our brains tend to go elsewhere, because we have the capacity to do something else. And this is why sometimes we lose focus in listening to the speaker. But on top of that, we've got the speaker we can actually think in, on average, 900 words a minute. So the speaker's got 900 words in his head, but we're only able to speak at 125 words a minute. So there's a big gap there. What that means is we've got 900 words, but we're only able to get out to 100 odd in a minute. So the first couple of minutes, we're not actually conveying what we've got in our heads. We're only getting, 11% per minute of the information that we've formed in our minds, and which is what we're trying to convey. So this is where, to have powerful conversations as a listener, it's not your job to make sense of what the speaker's trying to say. It's a job to help them make sense of what it is that they're trying to say, because they've got a lot more information in their head than they may be conveying. We're listening to what they haven't said and trying to help them get that information out. So as a speaker, and then I'm sure you've had the same kind of experience, when you're talking to somebody, they will briefly just say what it is that they meant, but we didn't quite understand what it is that they're trying to say. The difference is, when we're speaking, because we've got all this information in our head, we know the intention behind what it is that we're trying to say, but the listeners don't have that. So this is where, as a listener, we want to help understand what it is that the speaker's trying to say, and you can get more context in actually to get a better understanding of what it is that we're trying to, as a speaker, trying to convey. Being heard and understood contributes to the speaker feeling that the words have value, and that helps them to feel safe. This is where we intentionally pay attention. So we are actively listening and engaged in a conversation, and not letting our minds wander away. Psychological safety is something that's been coming up over the past few years quite a lot. There's loads of stuff out there. I've just got 3 bits of information which I've used. Amy Edmondson first came out with a phrase back in 1999, and so just so we have the same definition of what we mean, this is her definition that she came out with. So team psychological safety is a shared belief held by members of the team that are key to take risks, to express ideas and concerns, to speak up with questions, and to admit mistakes, all without fear of negative consequences. This is where we need to be in system 2 in order to feel that we can do that. Timothy Clark's also come out with a book where he talks about this, breaks this psychological safety down into 4 stages. And he talks about the different stages that we may be at, and the dynamics between the differences of where we are and where we could get to in order to help us get to a high level of psychological safety. Project Aristotle. This is something I bring up quite regularly with the teams that I work with as well. So Google measure everything. And one of the internal projects that we had was called Project Aristotle. So they wanted to see why some teams were doing better than other teams. They took all sorts of different metrics. The short answer is, whilst it came out with a lot of findings, the top attribute that came out that made the difference between high-performing teams was psychological safety, how people in the teams engaged with each other. So safety makes a lot of difference in our thinking. Amy, this is another visual that's shared by Amy. On the y-axis, we've got psychological safety along with performance standards on the x-axis, and she shows the different zones that we may fall into. So apathy is where we turn up to work just to do what needs to be done. We've gone through the motions. Here we have low psychological safety and we have low performance standards. The comfort zone, where we have high psychological safety but low performance standards, is we have an attitude where we are cooperating and being helpful, but we're not doing much in order to make progressions for ourselves. If we have low psychological safety and high performance standards, we're in the anxiety zone. So we have our own high standards, but we have a fear of what might happen, and we don't want to rock the boat and jeopardize what our performance is. So where we want to get to is in the learning zone. This is a nurturing environment where we feel safe enough to try new things. Sometimes things don't always work out, but we learn from them and then we try something else. The learning zone in system 2 is where we need to be to find and learn new changes and update and increase our comfort zone in system 1. Another practice that we can use, this came out from Chris Ogras in 1970, and it was in the book Fifth Discipline, which came out in 1984. So a lot of these have been around for a while. So this is a ladder of inference. It describes a thinking process that we go through, usually without realizing it, to get from a fact or a decision or to an action. The thinking stages can be seen as rungs on a ladder. And when we're working with other people, we start at the bottom of the ladder and we agree with the people that we're working with as we go up the rungs to confirm we have the same understanding at each step to create alignment and trust and validate that we are on the same page in order to come to our actions. As individuals, we can use this to confirm how we came to our actions and beliefs. We go backwards. So we have a belief about something in the world. What was it that got me to come to these conclusions? What were the assumptions that were made in order to get to these conclusions? What was the meaning that I put on the data that helped me get to that point? And what data was selected from the pool that influenced me to get to that point? Did I select something consciously? Is it valid? So we can go back and to help validate what our beliefs are by challenging ourselves on whether or not the assumptions that we're making are correct. Ooh, resources versus people. This is an ongoing thing in my head that I bring up in the places that I've worked at. Even looking at what we've been through in a presentation here, we can see that people are complex, that they've got emotions. We react to all sorts of situations in different ways because of system ones. I believe some biases are created by our individual memories and experiences. We've got our own mental models of the world. We're unique. So when we're talking to humans, treat them as a unique people that they are. Resources can be consumed, replaced like off the shelf. They're inanimate. Talking to people as resources doesn't help and contribute to making them feel valued as a person that they are. We value diversity to bring something new to the table and that they're recognized for. So yeah, referring to people as people actually it is what will contribute towards moving them towards a into system 2, so they feel safe enough to be able to actually open up more as a person rather than as a resource. The language that we use makes all the difference. This is David Marquet. You may have heard of him previously. He had a book called Turn the Ship Around. There's a little video, if you look at YouTube, that does a very good explanation of the first book. He came out with another book recently called Leadership is Language. And this book is about a container ship in 2015 called the El Faro. The crew had 33 mariners, and they sailed into a hurricane and they sank. One of the things that they were able to do is the ship had the equivalent of a black box. So they were able to get the full 25 hours transcript of the conversations on the bridge. And this is what he uses in his book. So he talks about how the language that was used from the industrial age, how it's still prevalent today, and shows how it was used with the captain and the crew, and what the impact that had in order, which is why they ended up where they are. So the language, so the industrial age is basically command and control, and because of that, they weren't able to get the feedback from the crew, which is why unfortunately they ended up in sinking in the sea. So what he offers is a new playbook, which is a leader approach rather than a leader follower. In his book, he uses examples of how the language, if it was a different approach, could have averted the disaster by creating a space for how the crew feels safe and would have been able to voice their thoughts and concerns. Right, don't know who originally came out with this quote, but I'm going to go with the one with Bruce. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing isn't enough. We must do. To make changes happen, we need to take a bias towards action. Otherwise, our potential remains as unrealized dreams. We're not moving forward. What I would like to do is, based on what you've heard and today, and what your understanding is of what I've covered, is what could you do to make change easier for ourselves and others. And it will be good if we can have a breakout, Helen, for this session. Thanks for coming back, folks. Can you share any of your insights or conversations that you had in the team on the chat, or just feel free to shout out?
We talked quite a bit about the Kubler-Ross curve and the change adoption curve, and also making mistakes for yourself.
Nice.
We talked a lot about psychological safety and how to create that. I guess so that the change can be, you can receive feedback on the change, etc. So we talked about team charters and things like that. We got quite into psychological safety, basically.
Wow. Thanks, Nicole.
I had one point that I was just explaining as I got kicked out of the room. So, but the point you made about needing it, we can help ourselves by adding a pause to get us out of the system 1, system 2. So what I talk quite fast. I get going. When I get going, I keep going. I'll try not to do that now, guys. But so maybe when introducing new ideas that possibly require some change or conversation to people, find a way to add a pause or like that natural break point, so maybe somebody else can break themselves out of their system 1, and rather than just react to what's just been said. And and maybe myself as well, because I definitely do this. Take a moment to not just react and try and do it. So that was, I really like that point.
Cool. Nice. Thanks, Ben.
I think one of the things for me was, as a coach, it's really easy to go into an organization and you see something and you're like, oh, well, that's not working because of this thing. And it took me a while to kind of really actually think, well, actually, every single different situation is different. And so we shouldn't always go in there with the assumption that it's not going to work. And I think if we open ourselves up to try, because it's new people, it's new experiences, it's potentially a different environment, then it means that, we may fail again, but at least we've given it another go and not just said no because we tried it 10 years ago and it didn't work back then. So I think as change leaders, we can always be open to retrying things and looking at things with fresh eyes.
Wow. Nice one, Ellen. So actually, there's a lot of stuff that you captured that I was going to come in a summary. So, when we feel as though we're in a fear zone, take the space and take the time to talk about the why. Why do we think we're here? Create this pause to respond rather than to react. And this will also help us to be more aware of our own biases and question their validity, and questioning why we automatically jump into things. Changing the environment to be in a learning zone, psychological safety, that makes all the difference. Language makes a difference, how we speak, and that David Marquette book is great for that. And the growth mindset, as you mentioned, Helen, it's what may not have worked is still a learning. And knowing what doesn't work is just as valuable as knowing what does work. And being persistent is an asset. And realizing your potential, the only way to do that is by coming out of your comfort zone. So that's a conscious decision to make. Cool. Were there any questions?
Okay, so sounds like Serge is ready to open up the floor for questions. First of all, give him a round of applause for his first ever meetup talk. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Yeah. If you can just get through the questions now, you can do this. So Colbert did have one in the chat channel. He was interested a little bit more a while ago about the fear zone. What exactly was it, Colbert, that you're interested in?
So if you recall the slide, Serge, perhaps we could just bring the slide up, or so whoever's controlling the slide deck. Waiting for it to come. There we go. So I get the comfort zone, I get the learning zone, I get the growth zone, but I'm trying to understand more what the fear zone is about, and I wasn't clear. So I just wanted to ask Serge whether he could just elaborate on that a bit more.
Yeah, that's I'll come up with my interpretation of this. So the comfort zone is we know where we are, we know what we know, and we not. It's a place where, by definition, of comfort zone, we don't need to looking at to go out of what we already know. The learning zone is when we're actively doing something to expand our knowledge, to try something new. the bit in the middle is the fear zone. This is where the new information comes in. This is the area where it's a bit grey and we're feeling overwhelmed or uncertain, and we're struggling with how to think clearly. And this is where, as we talked about, calming the amygdala will help us make a bit more sense of controlling our reactions, and then helping us decide how to respond. So in my head, that's the gray area between the comfort zone and actively doing something. Information comes in here, and it's in this zone where we actually make the decision on which direction we go. Do we go into system one by default, or do we calm down and take a logical thought process and say, actually, let's think more about this and go into system two?
I think your journey on this talk is actually a great example of this, because you're in your comfort zone because you come along to all of these, you know us, you know the gang. And then Helen says, can you do something? And then you're immediately in your fear zone. I've not spoken before. What happens if I say something and I make a mistake and I look a dick? What happens if I get my facts wrong? What happens if there's some? So you put yourself in that fear zone.
Yeah.
But you then hit learning at one point because you're like, well, I can do this and I can do this and I can do that. And so you're now moving into the growth, because after today, you're going to be like, well, actually, if I did this thing, I'm going to be even better. And if I added in this content, so your journey is actually mirrored this system as quite a nice example. Sadly, to get to the growth zone, you quite often have to conquer your own fears.
Yes, that's a good summary. Thanks, Ellen. And yep, that's kind of what happened. My default reaction was, what the hell? But then actually I was thinking there might be, with the chats that we had, there might be something that other people might find interesting right now. So seeing if I could also try this for the first time, and it'll be a learning experience. And yeah, I think having gone through it once, now that I've gone through it, you have a bit more understanding and experience of what it is like to do this. So that's contributed towards making my comfort zone just a little bit bigger.
Great explanation, Coach. Thank you for that. It reminded me of a quote, actually, as you were talking, and that was getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it sort of resonated with me just then. And yeah, I like what you're saying, so thanks for that.
Thanks.
Nicole, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, cool, Bear. I've got my hand up. Okay, I know, cool, Bear. Yeah, thank you, Serge. That was great. The ladder of inference is one that I've looked at quite a few times, and I've interacted with. I was wondering, I think it's quite complicated, actually, when you look at that diagram and the amount of steps, and when you're thinking, you don't consciously go through those steps without some training, right? So I was wondering how you've used it in coaching teams or individuals, how you've really landed it for people, because I think it isn't something that you get necessarily on first look.
I have to say, actually, so a lot of these are just things that I know about and or read about. So these are just little snippets of them. And as you said, there's a lot more to a lot of these. For me, I guess more from a coaching perspective, I'm challenging, similar to what Helen was saying, is we have a belief or an assumption that this person is doing this because of that. So in order to make the space with the pause to validate what it is, my thinking that led to that is I when I can, I'm actively going back a little bit and say, why would this person be doing this? What have I seen that may have make me think to why I've come to that conclusion? And did I see everything that was there? What else did I miss? So I have to say, I probably use this more from a personal side for me to validate why I've come to a conclusion. Less, I think, more with teams with my personal experience.
Yeah, great. That makes sense. Sure. Thank you.
Thanks. Were there any other questions then?
I haven't seen any. Is there any more from the room at all? Oh, Logan's got his hand up. Go for it. You're mute if you're speaking, Logan. Are you there, Logan? Can you hear us? No. Oh. Zoom says the host is, oh, everybody else is unmuted. Maybe it's just you I don't like. Have a go now. Unmute yourself. Or pop your question in the chat channel. No.
Put it in the chat, see if that helps.
Yeah. Pop it in the chat channel. Does anybody else have a question in the meantime? While Logan writes his question. In anticipation for the question.
I got one. It might just be sanity checking a potential realization of my own. So I've often thought, particularly at the company where I am now, that maybe it's kind of lack of understanding or engagement are the reasons why you perhaps don't get support from the senior management or the people beyond the teams for what we're doing. But listening to some of the things you said earlier in the talk, is it possible that that those are actually the symptoms, and possibly the root cause might be their own psychological safety to actually like engage and do these things, and we're just seeing the symptoms at the end of it?
Yeah, no, in the places I've been to, it's whilst we may be talking to the next level up, we don't know the challenges of the level of that they have, with the level up that they have above them. So yeah, I guess it depends on how big your window is to see further up the chain to understand what their challenges are, because the pressure is going to come downhill. And again, as we were talking about before, the environment makes all the difference. So in a pressurized environment may make people behave in a different way, and which results in saying we need to get teams to go faster. But what's the reason behind that? So how do we challenge that to find out what is driving this? So yeah, those are probably good questions to get a better understanding on reason and background behind this. Otherwise, we make our assumptions and just say, yes, it's just the person that we see. And this goes back to the Daniel Kahneman quote of what we see is all there is.
Thanks, Serge.
Helen, you're on mute.
Good observation. It always happens one time, doesn't it? Look, Logan, I can unmute myself. So it goes back to the beginning. The first time that Logan was in the breakout room, two of them answered a math question about the bat and the ball.
Right.
So he wants to know, how does the concept of the bat and the ball fit in with fast and slow?
Right. So the answer that a lot of people came up with was 10 pence for the ball. That's because for them, we went into system one, into our lazy mind, to say the ball is actually, it's, we mentioned £1, that means the ball must be 10 pence. But the question was slightly different. It was slightly harder. The question was, how much more was the bat? And so to do that, we actually have to do a bit more thinking and go into system two, rather than just going and making a default conclusion, because it was an easier answer to give.
I think also, to add a little bit extra onto there, how does it relate to system one, system two? And it's a great example of where your brain does one thing. It's the same as if I said to you, what's 2 times 5? You probably wouldn't have to think about it because your brain would give you that exact answer. But if I said to you, what's 172 times 172? I'm sure one of you can answer it, but your brain would start thinking like, oh, wow. But what happens is quite quickly, your brain starts to pattern match. So you can work out what 100 times 100 is. You can work out what 50 times 50 is. You would soon be able to work out what that answer is just by knowing some of those other patterns. And so I think the bat and the ball plays nicely into that because it's an example of where your brain is trying to be lazy and it sees the answer as 10p because that's what I would do. But in reality, it wants you to hit that cognitive thinking side. And actually, the answer is something that's completely different, but your brain has been lazy to get there. So I think for me, that's a great example of how those two things are linked.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, for the folks that got the question right.
You did.
Yep. Your logical default thinking is actually better in that particular instance. So well done.